Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out. It's time for Bible class. Before we start, let's bow together and say a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we're thankful to Thee for this time that we have set aside each Wednesday evening so that we can come together to study Your Word. And we ask You to bless this class and help us to accomplish the things that we are trying to do and coming to a better appreciation for all the time periods in the Bible. We ask You to bless the other classes as well that are meeting at this time, that much faith may be engendered amongst our young people. Be with those that are with us tonight because they're not feeling well, and help them to recover soon. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, I thought I would take an opportunity tonight, not because I have extra time to do it, but I appreciate getting permission from Justin and Stan. I guess it was last week, wasn't it, Stan? That we could take a little bit longer if we need to. So we're not tied to a quarter. We can take next quarter, and that's nice because it gives me some leeway to talk about some interesting things, you know, in the events that we might overlook. And I've done a little bit of that so far. But I wanted to review tonight why we're doing that. The workbook we're using for our visitors is called The Bible from 20,000 Feet. It's written by a brother in Christ named Wayne Holt, and it's based on Bob Waldron's work, the three-cycle approach. And Brother Waldron divides Bible history into 17 periods, he calls them. And we're going to learn them and memorize them, and memorize some things about each period, and it's going to serve us well. So why are we doing this? What is that we're going to learn? So beside the 17 time periods and the links that will give us hints between them, we're also learning something else that not all of us are too crazy about. What is that? Yes, thank you. Oh, that's beautiful. That's well done. I can't quite get mine up that pretty. But we're doing hand motions to tie physical actions along with our verbal actions to help us to remember things, or remember the time periods better. And the reason we're doing that is because Dawn was telling me how that she did it with the 4 and 5-year-olds, and they loved it. They thought it was great. And they learned it cold. They've got it down. So they're ahead of us. We've got to catch up. So we're learning the 7 time periods. We're learning the hand motions. What else are we trying to learn and memorize from each time period? The main events that happened during that time period, okay? We don't want to get too deep and too involved with that. We want to hit the highlights and maybe even kind of bookend the events at the beginning and end so that we can remember what's happening during that time period. Also, hopefully, we'll learn the scriptural bounds of the time periods, where they start and end in a book chapter. And maybe if we get really into it, a timeline. Nothing detailed, but something, you know, rather simple, so that we can have an appreciation for where we are, you know, in the Bible timeline. Okay. So, what is so special? What Brother Waldron described what was so special about learning these time periods. The first thing is what we just discussed. We want to learn the basic facts of Bible history. Have you ever heard something like just an isolated Bible fact or something, and you just didn't know where to put it, and as soon as you walked away from it, you forgot it, and it kind of reminds us of the problem of the vase. Do y'all remember the problem of the vase and the warehouse? Come on, y'all remember that, right? What happens if you take a vase to a warehouse and they put it in a box that's not labeled and put that in another box that's not labeled, and they take it to the warehouse and put it on a shelf that's not labeled, and you go back 6 months later, ask for your vase, and they don't even remember you brought a vase, let alone where it's at. That's the way sometimes we are when we're sitting through Bible class and we're studying this this matter or this matter, and we don't have a place to put it. So the second and probably the most important thing about doing it this way is we're trying to build a framework of organization so that when we have future Bible studies, we can put all this that we're studying into our timeline. See, so it'll help us to have better access to those studies and better retention as far as memory is concerned. And the third is a very important one. And what is that? The third is the scarlet thread of redemption. We want to be able to see God's plan and the fulfillment of it and how that runs through all these time periods, okay? All right, so who's up for some review? We still only know 4. We're not ready to add the 5th one yet because we still got to do the Patriarchs, and we're going to be there. He's got 3 lessons covering the Patriarchs. So we'll be in it a little bit. So we ought to have these first 4 time periods down cold. So what's this one called? Before the flood. That's not the sun, that's the earth. So this is a globe, and it stands for the earth. Before the earth. And what's the second one? Right? Floods. The kids like to do the waves. And what's the third one?
Tower of Babel and scattering.
Yeah. This is building the tower, and this is the scattering of the people. And then what's the 4th one we learned? Right. 4. There's 3 patriarchs. So who's this? Joseph. And why am I including Joseph? Because he's the link to the next time period, right? Joseph is the reason why the children of Israel end up in Egypt, okay? And the next time period is the Exodus. Very good. Y'all did very well. Are y'all practicing this at home when you're by yourself and there's nobody to watch? Can you do it backwards? Yeah, or now. There are only 4 of them, right, Tustin? You can do 4 of them now. But one of the things we want to also do is to kind of remember what some of the main events from each one are. If you look at Brother Waldron's book, he's got some pretty good lists for some of the time periods. We're not going to do that, I don't think. We're going to stick with the main ones. But before the flood, it's pretty easy, okay? There's 4 main things that we like to remember from before the flood. What are they? Obvious, the first one is what? Creation, yes. Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to yell. Creation, and then what after that? Chapter 2 discusses who and where. Has to be Adam and Eve. There's no other people, right? It's Adam and Eve in the garden, okay? They're living happily in the garden until chapter 3 when Satan shows up in the guise of a serpent. And what happens? The fall, or the original sin. And then after that, in chapter 4, who comes on the scene? Cain and Abel, and what happens? Cain murders Abel. And those are the things you want to remember. And it shouldn't be hard to remember. We all knew that already to begin with. It's just like me, when I'm trying to sing a song from memory, it doesn't come because I haven't sung it from memory before. I've got one song that I learned, how many years ago is this? 47 years ago when I was in college. I can sing it just fine because I learned it. But not until you force yourself to do something from memory, and that's reciting something without looking at a list that you commit it to those places in your brain that you can actually pull it from. Okay, so what's the link to the next period? What's the link between before the flood and the flood? What happens in chapter 5, do you remember? Huh? Genealogy, or the generations from Adam to who? To Noah, Adam to Noah. So there's your link. The genealogy is given to Noah, and of course Noah then brings us to the flood. Okay, tell me some things that happened during that time period. Obvious, easy one is the flood itself, right? What happens before the flood? Yes, got to have the ark. You can't have the flood yet because we got to save those 8 people. If it wasn't for those 8 people, we wouldn't be here, would we? Right,
Also, the unlawfulness of people leaving the use of the ark.
exactly. The wickedness of man had gotten so bad that God was sorrowful that he had made them and had decided to destroy all of man along with who or what? All cattle, creeping things, and the birds, right? All land mammals, everything that had the breath of life. What about after the flood? What happens after the flood ends? What did Noah do right away when he came down out? Built an altar and sacrificed, right? In fact, he took animals to do that very thing. He had the animals to do that. And then chapter 9 is interesting because there's some things in there that you don't normally think of, but we've discussed them. And one had to do with what they're going to eat. Genesis 1, 29 and 30 says that man and all animals had every green herb to eat. And as far as we know, that's all they ate until after the flood, and God told Noah to eat meat. Okay? But don't eat what? The blood with the meat. Okay? Not to eat the blood with the meat. He also instituted life for life. What's that all about? What do we talk about when we talk about life for life? Yeah, no, not just murder, but capital punishment. If you kill somebody, you could expect to be killed. Okay, so that becomes law. And then the rainbow covenant. Why did God give man a rainbow? What did that signify? It was a sign of this covenant. What was it a sign of? God's promise to never again do what? Say it again. Destroy the world by flood. Right. It's not a promise not to destroy the world. All right. It's not a promise to never kill everybody again, but not to do it by flood. You can call it a one-sided covenant because there was nothing on man's side to do about it. It was to remind man when he saw the rainbow that God made a promise that he would never flood the earth again. It was also to remind God. He even said that when I see the rainbow, then I will remember that I will not cause a flood. And then finally, what terrible thing happened to righteous Noah? What did he do? Yeah, he grew a vineyard, and man, those grapes were good, and the wine was good, and he drank too much, and he got drunk, and it led to sin, didn't it? So that's a handful of things, but if you think about it and try to keep them in your mind, then that'll work. Then what's the link to scattering of the people? It's in chapter 10. What's chapter 10? It's another what?
Genealogy from Noah.
It's another genealogy, right? Who does it go to? It goes from Noah to who? It doesn't go to Abraham. That's the question. What's the purpose of these generations? Remember, I called it something last week. Do you remember what I called it? The table of the nations. The table of the nations. Think of this genealogy as a horizontal one, and it explains, and it's the link, because now we're going to find out what happens to make this come about. All right. So it's the link to the next period. So it's the horizontal spread of people across the earth. Okay, and Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their descendants. It's just like textbook of all the different countries and nations. And then last thing we discussed last week was the scattering of the people, and the link there is the Tower of Babel, right? Because the Tower of Babel doesn't belong before or after this period, does it? It's interesting because I talked about this period as only being one chapter, all right? And not even that. It's just a handful of verses, and then it goes into the genealogy to Abraham, doesn't it? So it's a very short little time period, but it's very important because the tower doesn't belong to either side. And the tower brings about what? what happens because of the tower? That's what causes the scattering of the people. Because when they built that tower, what did the people do? They sinned against God, right? Because of pride. Yeah. And so they even said, verse 14, let's do this lest we be scattered. Well, God had already commanded them to do what? This was after the flood. Commanded them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Now, how are you going to fill the earth if you're all living in one place? God wanted them to spread out, and this is how he did that. So he spread them out. Just a few interesting little facts there. It was about 500 to 600 miles from Ararat down to the plain of Shinar. It's a long way, and we don't know how many people yet there was, or how long they spent in Ararat, and they worked their way down there. And it was about 100 to 200 years after the flood when they got down there. Genesis 10:25 mentions Peleg. He was born 100 years after the flood. Noah lived another 350 years. So it was about 4 to 5 generations till we get to the Tower of Babel. And by that time, there's about 10,000 to 50,000 people who know how to count these kinds of populations that they come up, and they say that's a very conservative number. But then it was another 100 to 150 years after that, from Shem to Abraham, or 300 years after the flood, and now we're talking tens of millions of people, okay, that are now spread out. How can that possibly happen in such a relative short period of time? What's the explanation for that? How long was people living? Yes. Before the flood, as much as 969 years, right? After the flood, 600 years plus, 400 years easily all the way through the Tower of Babel. And if you're having a baby every year, the population, you have a population explosion, don't you? Okay.
You say that's about 10 million?
Tens of millions. And apparently that's a rather conservative estimate. So it's a lot of people. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at our lesson. And we're going to talk about the patriarchs. Now, what does the word patriarch mean again? Fatherly rule, right? Ark is a ruler, and patra is father. Father rule is what it means. Now, were there only these 3 patriarchs? No. Every tribe had a patriarch, right? The oldest person living would have been the patriarch. Let me ask you this. Was Noah alive at the Tower of Babel? Or had he died yet? No, he was alive. He was alive for some time after the Tower of Babel. And when everybody else left, and Shem and his family that were descending, from Noah, they settled there in Mesopotamia, lower Mesopotamia, okay? And that's where Abraham came from. He was a descendant of Shem, right? So he came from Ur of the Chaldees, which is in Mesopotamia. So yeah, Adam was the patriarch of that family then.
So would we get from
Not
that,
Adam, Noah. Mm-hmm.
that since Genesis 9:28 indicates that Noah lived after the flood for 350 years, and the time of Abraham was about 300 years, that Noah and Abraham's lifespan is somewhat intersected.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
How long people lived, how long they were on the earth. Now, there's 39 chapters for the patriarchs. So obviously, we're not going to be doing this in-depth stuff anymore. We're going to mention some major things for each patriarch. Try to. We got 2 left. Well, parts, one lesson and part of another one, for Abraham. Before we start looking at Isaac. But, so chapter 12 to 25. Remember that, if you can commit that to memory. 12 to 25 is Abraham. And there are some certain facts that we learn about Abraham at the end of chapter 11. And that's the people who are involved. What was Abraham's father? What was his name? Does anybody remember? Terah. What was his brother's names? One is easy to remember because it's where he's going to end up living. Haran. However you pronounce it. Haran, I think. I looked it up. I'm not going to remember that because that's not how we pronounce it. We say Haran, don't we? And Nahor, right? Remember Nahor? Okay. So, what happens to Haran? Haran dies in Ur of the Chaldees before Terah and his group ever leave. So he's gone. Nahor is married to Milcah and he stays there. Okay? Abram, we can't call him Abraham yet. That doesn't happen to Genesis 17. But Abram and Sarai are married, and Sarai is barren already. It's been determined that she's barren. The importance of Nahor and Milcah is what? Abraham wants a wife for his son Isaac, and where does that wife come from? What's her name? We got a daughter named Rebecca, right? Well, Rebecca is Isaac's second cousin once removed. I had to study that. Because he's Abram's son, but Rebecca is the son of Bethuel, which is the son of Nahor and Milcah. Okay? But he was sent. Abraham wanted his servant to go all the way back home to Ur of the Chaldees to find a suitable husband, a suitable wife for his husband from his own family. So that's what we know about them coming into chapter 12. And we learn from the very beginning of the chapter that God is going to call, get out my easy Bible, where does he call Abraham from at the beginning of chapter 12? Come on, y'all. Haran. Okay? They're in the city of Haran. And that's where they left from. So it starts off saying that Jehovah said to Abraham, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house, the land that I will show thee." And verse 5 says, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran is where they left from. But I thought God called him from Ur. So now in chapter 12, first chapter 12, he's calling them from Haran. So what was it? Did he call him from Ur or not? Somebody turn to Acts chapter 7, and someone else turn to Genesis 15. Whoever gets to chapter 7 first can read verses 2 and 3. Of course, if this is chapter 7, we know who's talking, don't we? Because we've already got a timeline, all right, for the church, right? That's Stephen. And right off he starts talking. What does he say? Acts 7, 2 and 3.
He said, "Brethren and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, Get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land that I will show you."
There you go. Thank you, Stephen. He spelled it pretty clear. But even in Genesis 15, verse 7, what does it say? Who got there? Everybody went to Acts. That's okay.
I've got it.
What is it, Neil?
Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it.
There you go. So there's God reminding Abraham that I called you out of Ur. So yeah, he's definitely out of Ur. And then he makes promises to him, doesn't he? Right away in Genesis 12. What are the three promises that he makes? Actually, he only makes two in Haran, and then he makes one in Canaan. What are the two that he makes in Haran? Well, you can kind of guess what is in Canaan, right? Because that's the land that's going to be promised. So that's what he promises the land to Abraham, is once he gets down into Canaan, he makes that promise. But while he is still in Haran, he promises the nation promise and the seed promise. Okay, and then he makes his trip down into Canaan in the vicinity of Shechem, and that's when God tells him that he will receive the land. Okay, something big happens next. It kind of foreshadows a very important event. They go on a trip from Canaan. Where do they go and why? Yes, famine. And they had to leave Canaan, and they had to go to where there was food. And where was the food? Egypt. What is this foreshadowing? Does this sound familiar? What does it sound like? Does this happen in the future? Yes. There's a famine, and Jacob, Israel, sends his sons to go down to get food, right? And of course, Joseph's there, and there's a really big story involved with that. So there's a famine, and everybody ends up in Egypt, right? But what happens to the Pharaoh when Abram and Sarai are down in Egypt, and Abram does not tell Pharaoh what? This is my wife. He was afraid. Okay? He was afraid. He didn't tell him. And so he started flirting with him. He never did anything, but he started courting him, didn't he? Her. And what happened? What happened to Pharaoh? Think 10 of them in the future. He was plagued. God plagued him because of what was going on. And because of the plagues, he released Abram and Sarai, and I assume Lot's with them too. And when they left, what did they take with them? Wealth. That's a lot of foreshadowing right there, isn't it? Okay, so yeah. God made promises, and then there was a great famine. And this is all happening in chapter 12. Chapter 13, there's a split. What happens? What's the split? What's the deal between Abram and Lot? What's the problem? Right. Their flocks that God had blessed Abram and Lot, and their flocks are huge, and there's just not enough grass for them, and they have to split. And Abram says, you choose. And he chooses the fertile plain down around Sodom, and that's where he goes to his chagrin, right? Because he ends up moving in. He'd been a Bedouin all this time, but now he's going to live in this sinful city. So that's what happens in that chapter, right? But right after this, I don't know if it was because of the events that had just occurred, but God renews his promise of the land to Abram while he's there. He says, look, north, look, south, look, east and west, all that you see, I will give you. Okay? And then a few verses later, he says, go, walk the land, walk up and down it, because this is yours. And of course, he doesn't possess it yet. He doesn't have a legal claim to it, but God has promised it, and it's good as his, right? So as he's walking the land, he can think this is mine, but he can't possess it yet. And in fact, we know it's not his to do with what he will, because when Sarah dies, what does he have to do? He has to buy a piece of land so that he can bury his wife. He doesn't even own any land to bury his wife. He had to buy the cave of Machpelah so he could do that. But when we talk about the children of Israel coming up, into Canaan, we talk about them doing what? Taking possession of the land. They're taking possession of it because it's always been theirs, right? They just God hasn't got them there yet to take possession of it. Okay, so that's the promise. Well, okay, War of the Kings, that's something else we shouldn't just skip over. We should try and remember that that's an important part during the time span of Abraham. Of course, this is all about the patriarchs. We got 3 of them, right? But we're dealing with the first one. What was the War of the Kings? There's 4 Mesopotamian kings. I think, if I remember right, there's 5 kings that were down in the south, and they were all beholden to those, and they rebelled against them. Lot just got caught in the middle of it. They weren't after Lot. They came down to enforce their rule over these kings in Canaan. And when they took everybody captive, they took who? Lot and his family and all his belongings. And Abraham rescues Lot. And what happens when he goes on the way home? You remember? Who does he meet? Melchizedek. That's an important meeting, isn't it? Because what does he do when he meets Melchizedek? He tithes, doesn't he? He gives him 1/10 of everything that he's gotten. And all along, God's blessing him now. He's getting more and more, isn't he? Okay. In chapter 15, God repeats again the nation promise. And then in chapter 16, a very important event happens. We have to say that even though Abram and Sarai, you know how we fall back on calling them? That's not their names yet. Not Abraham and Sarah yet, are they? But what did they lose faith in? God promised them that through them he would raise up a great nation. All nations of the earth would be blessed. And Abraham's sitting back here, I'm so old, and nothing's happening. And then he just says, God, how's this supposed to happen? And so God is repeating his promises to him. And then who comes up with the great solution? Sarai. And gives Abram her handmaid named Hagar, and Ishmael is the result. And Ishmael and Hagar were treated horribly, weren't they, by Sarai? And who does Sarai blame for all this? Abram. It was her idea. And she blamed Abram. So remember Ishmael, and he becomes a father of a great nation himself. God blessed Hagar and Ishmael. And then 17 is when God actually establishes the covenant. Now, up to this point, God has made promises, right? What were the 3 promises? Nation, next. Land, and seed promise, that all nations would be blessed, right? No covenant yet. So what's the difference between promises and covenants? There's one very important thing. If you're in a covenantal relationship with God, what does that mean? It's reciprocal. What does that mean? If you're in a reciprocal covenantal relationship. God's made a promise to you. What he has said is, if you do this, I will do this. Okay? And both parties have to agree to that, don't they? What did God promise? Again, he's been promising it all along. He just renewed that promise, but he says, we're going to make a covenant, and if you will do this, and what was it? What did he command Abraham to do? Walk righteously and obey my commandments, right? Basically. You agree to do that, and here's the sign of the covenant. Now, what's the sign? Circumcision. He gave the sign, and this poor man, at his great age, has to do this, but he does, because if he doesn't, there's no covenant. And if any descendant of his decides, I don't want to be circumcised, what happens to that person? They're cut off. All right? They are not part of the promise anymore. And this is foreshadowing what? The covenantal relationship that God has with us today when we reciprocate. You have to reciprocate, all right? Or there is no salvation. What's the sign of the covenant? Baptism? Maybe. Could be. If you're not circumcised, you cannot be, you're cut off. And if you're not baptized, you cannot be saved. Okay. So that's pretty much it for this lesson, except for the name change. Now, Abram meant exalted father. That's what it meant. And God changed his name to Abraham, which means what? Father of nations. Sarai meant my princess. So when Abram would call his wife Sarai, you're saying, you're my princess. I love you so much. You're my princess. But God changed his name to Sarah. And Sarah can tell you what that means. Can't you, Sarah? That's you. It's princess. It means princess. And this is a royal person. So she becomes the mother of nations. Galatians 3:16, what does that say? Now to Abraham were the promises spoken, and to his seed. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. So that covenantal relationship included the three promises, and that verse right there makes it clear that it included the seed promise, which pointed all the way to Christ. Okay, let's look at our questions. They're pretty short. Now, y'all looked at the lesson. Did I overlook anything that you would like to maybe comment on, or?
I'd like to revisit
Yes.
again, just very quickly, the land promise.
Uh-huh.
And you're indicating that chapter 13 is stated more clearly. Because I've got 1, 2, and 3 by what was stated in verse 12, chapter 12.
Mm-hmm.
So number 1, as you indicated, there's the information in the land promise, and that you're gonna go to a land that I will show you. But I have an arrow down in verse 7 of the text, when the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. And I was wondering if I was missing something in the distinction that you were making.
I'm not real sure what exactly I was saying.
Well, I'm just saying, you're saying that the two promises were made in Genesis 12, which are right. There's only an intimation in that promise
Well,
that was made.
The third was made also, but it wasn't made in Haran. Is that what she's talking about?
Well, I may misunderstood you. From what I understood you saying, that when the Lord spoke to Abraham in 12, verses 1 through 3, that the two promises, verse 2, I will make you a great nation, and the third promise, or the other promise there, was the seed promise, and in you all the family of yours shall be blessed.
Right.
So that would mean that the land promise was not made there, but it was intimated in first. Okay, so does verse 7, though, impact that, or are you making a distinction between that and what was said later about the land?
Verse 7, I think the point is that that's when the land promise was made, after they got to Canaan.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
I just misunderstood what you're saying.
Yeah, because once they got down to Canaan, Jehovah appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed will I give this land. Now he's there and he sees the land, because he's been walking the breadth of it ever since he came down from the north.
I just
into the
misunderstood. I was
south.
thinking you said it was the next chapter.
Oh, no. Okay, good question. Anything else, anybody? Okay. Here's one that I forgot to mention. The first two promises are fulfilled within 500 years. It takes about 500 years for that to happen. The last promise is not fulfilled for how many years? Y'all this is something that thank you, 2,000 years, right? There's a rough timeline that we can easily keep in our head from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years, right? From Abraham to Christ, 2,000 years. Okay. And used to be from Christ to us 2,000 years. We're getting beyond that, aren't we? Not that that's really significant. Okay. Let's look at our questions then. There's only 3, but the first question is very interesting because Brother Holt is including 2 passages, Deuteronomy 26:18 and 1 Peter 2:9. And what do those 2 passages have in common? What was the relationship between them? Moses was speaking to the children of Israel, who were the descendants that was promised to Abraham, right? In Deuteronomy 26:18, he said, also today, the Lord has proclaimed you to be his what? Special people. Thank you, Naomi. His special people. In other words, the covenantal relationship, right? Right. Just as he promised you that you should keep all his commandments. And then later in the New Testament, Peter wrote to Christians in 1 Peter 2:9, and he said, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own what? Special people. The exact same thing, right? Right. Okay. Jesus Christ, Messiah, came through the descendants of who? Abraham. Right. Abraham is the person from whom flows the descendants, the genealogy that leads to Christ. And then finally, Acts 7:8, we just finished talking about that. Then he gave him the covenant of what? Circumcision. And so Abraham begot Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. And we're going to pick up in chapter 18. We still have a little bit to talk about there. And then we'll get into Isaac. Okay? All right, we're done a little bit early unless somebody has a final something to say. Thank you very much. Y'all keep practicing. It'll get a little bit more challenging after we get more of them, but we're slowly, unless y'all want to learn them all at once, whatever you want to do. I thought it'd be, because then we could be practicing them as we go along, right? I'll give you one. What comes after Patriarchs? You can think of this on your own, all right? Yeah, but not just the slavery. The link is Joseph, and they're in Egypt, so what's got to happen is for them to leave Egypt, right? So that's the 5th period, is the Exodus. And the sign, what's the most phenomenal thing that happened while they were leaving Egypt or after they left Egypt? Thank you. So you put your hands together. Go ahead. Put your hands together. Take them apart and walk through the Red Sea. There you go. You learned another sign. So you practice that, and we'll review that next week. Okay?
I can turn around and wave bye.
Yes.